My son-in-law left me stranded at the train station with no money, calling me a useless old burden. My daughter stood by his side in silence, as if all my years of sacrifice had meant nothing. I sat on a cold bench, my pockets empty, my heart breaking. But deep inside, I held a secret they never imagined. For decades, I had hidden millions in assets, tucked away where no one could touch them. As I reached for my phone, my last battery bar flashing red, I dialed my banker. That call would change everything, though no one would ever hear me boast. The words of my son-in-law echoed in my head as the train pulled away without me, the bitter taste of humiliation still sharp on my tongue. A useless old burden. I could still hear his voice, smug and cruel, like he had been waiting years for the right moment to cast me aside. As the station emptied around me, I thought back to the long, winding road that had brought me here, to this cold bench, to this hollow silence, where I was no longer a mother, no longer a wife, just a discarded shell. My name is Margaret Ellison. 63 years of living, most of it given away piece by piece to the people I loved. When my husband died in his 40s, I buried my own dreams alongside him. I never remarried. I never chased adventure. I never asked life for more than what I had, because what I had was Claire, my daughter. Raising her alone became my entire purpose. I worked 2 jobs when she was little. I cleaned offices at night, coming home with aching feet, only to rise again before dawn to manage the grocery store checkouts. Every dollar went to her. New shoes for school, violin lessons she later abandoned, braces to straighten her smile. I gave her everything I could. When Claire wanted to go to college out of state, I sold my wedding ring, the last piece of jewelry her father had given me, just to cover her first semester. I never told her. She thought financial aid had pulled through. But no, it was me, always me. And in return, I asked for nothing, not even gratitude. A mother's love doesn't keep score, I told myself. But late at night, I sometimes wondered what it might feel like to be seen, truly seen, by the child you built your life around. There were moments when I let myself dream of something else. Once I had wanted to open a small art studio. I loved painting, loved the smell of oils and the scratch of brushes on canvas. I even took classes when Claire was still in middle school. But when the bills piled up and her science camp fee arrived, I folded the dream neatly, like an unfinished sketch tucked into a drawer. Later, I thought perhaps I would take a trip, see the world I had only read about in library books, Paris, Florence, even a simple road trip down the coast. But those savings went to her first car. I watched the taillights disappear down the street and told myself, this is enough. Her joy is my joy. What Claire never knew, and what I never intended to reveal, was that I wasn't as poor as I seemed. Years ago, an old friend, someone who had trusted me with more than friendship, left me a quiet inheritance. Stocks, bonds, a small rental property in a town 2 hours away. I had tucked it all away, refusing to touch it, refusing to even think of it as mine. To reveal it would mean inviting questions, expectations, perhaps resentment. So I let them think I was scraping by on Social Security, a modest pension, and the occasional odd job. The truth was, I had built a fortress in silence, brick by financial brick, and no one had ever stepped inside. That night at the station, shivering in the damp air, I remembered the first time I looked at those papers, the will, the certificates, the neat ledger of assets. I had told myself, this is for later. This is for when everything else is gone. And now, sitting penniless and betrayed, later had finally come. Still, the betrayal cut deeper than any financial wound. It wasn't the empty purse that stung, but the empty eyes of my daughter when she turned away. Claire, the little girl I had carried on my hip through storms. The teenager I had sat awake waiting for. The woman I had applauded at her wedding, had chosen silence over me. That silence shouted louder than any insult. I thought back to when she was young, how she would climb into my lap after a nightmare, whispering, "You'll never leave me, right, Mom?" I had answered with all the certainty in the world, never. And I had kept that promise, even when it broke me. I never left her. But now, as the train carried her further from me, I realized she had left me long ago. Perhaps that is the cruelest part of motherhood. You give everything, your body, your health, your money, your dreams, and still, there may come a day when your child looks through you like you're invisible. That day had come for me. Yet as I sat with the weight of 63 years pressing down, I felt a strange clarity slip in between the cracks of my grief. Maybe love had blinded me to the truth all along. Family can betray you as easily as strangers. And if they could deny my sacrifices, then perhaps the time had come to stop measuring my worth by their recognition. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, the station lights flickering above. The inheritance, the secret fortune, lingered at the edge of my thoughts. I had never wanted to use it, but maybe it wasn't about want anymore. Maybe it was about survival. If you were me, would you still believe that blood is enough to guarantee loyalty? Would you still believe that love demands nothing in return? Or would you finally begin to fear the day when love itself can vanish, leaving you with nothing but a broken heart and a secret no one knows? The weeks leading up to that train station had been filled with small signs I refused to see. Thomas had always carried himself with a kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance, but lately it had turned into something sharper, colder. Decisions about family dinners, holidays, even where Claire and I would sit at gatherings, seemed to fall squarely in his hands. He never raised his voice, never struck me with obvious cruelty, but his weapon was exclusion. It was in the way he spoke over me at the table, the way he redirected conversations when I tried to suggest something, the way he smiled thinly when I volunteered to help. At first I told myself it was nothing. He was busy. He was stressed. He wanted to be the man of the house. I tried to step back, thinking it was best to let the younger generation take charge, but it became clearer with every passing day that he wasn't simply leading, he was erasing me. Claire noticed. Of course she did. She would glance at me sometimes when Thomas dismissed my words with a wave of his hand. There was always that flicker of conflict in her eyes, like she wanted to speak but swallowed the words before they could escape. I used to believe she would stand up for me, that no matter what, my daughter would not let me fade into the background. But belief has a way of withering when silence grows too loud. The final proof came on the day of our trip. It was supposed to be simple, just a short train ride together, a little getaway. I had looked forward to it, maybe foolishly, imagining conversations, laughter, and a chance to feel like family again. I even packed homemade sandwiches, the way I used to when Claire was a child. I wanted to be useful, to give something, however small. At the station, the air smelled of iron and oil, the chatter of travelers blending with the shrill whistle of departing trains. I held my small bag tightly, waiting for Claire and Thomas to join me at the platform. Thomas checked his watch with impatience, tapping his foot against the concrete. "We should get moving," he muttered, not looking at me. Claire stood close beside him, her eyes lowered. I followed them toward the gate, but halfway there Thomas stopped and turned. His smile was sharp, almost amused. "You know, Margaret," he said, his voice low but clear enough for me to hear over the noise, "you've been clinging on too long. Maybe it's time you learn to manage on your own." Before I could answer, he reached for Claire's hand, guiding her toward the train. My daughter glanced back once, her face pale, but she said nothing. I felt my breath catch as the reality settled in. They were leaving me there. I reached into my coat pocket instinctively for my wallet, only to find it gone. Panic flared. My bag, too, was lighter than it should have been. Thomas must have slipped it out earlier when I wasn't paying attention. A deliberate act, not a mistake. My knees weakened, but I forced myself to stand straighter. As the train doors began to close, Thomas leaned slightly out of the doorway, his expression smug. "Funny thing about secrets," he said, his voice carrying over the rumble of the engine. "They never stay hidden forever. I wonder what Claire will think when she finds out what you've been keeping from her." My heart lurched. He knew, or at least he suspected. The inheritance I had hidden all those years, the quiet fortune no one had ever seen. Somehow, he had caught a scent of it. My daughter's silence in that moment was more crushing than his words. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't defend me. She simply stood by his side, letting the doors close between us. The train pulled away, the roar of steel on steel fading into the distance, and I was left alone on the platform with nothing but the echo of his taunt. My bag was nearly empty, my wallet gone, and yet the heaviest emptiness was in my chest. I sank onto a bench, the chill of the metal seeping through my coat. My hands trembled in my lap, not from age but from betrayal. I stared at the lines on my palms, the very hands that had fed Claire, dressed her, wiped her tears, and guided her through every stumble of childhood. And now they shook because she had chosen silence over me. A question burned in my mind, unrelenting, a whisper I could not silence. What would you do if the very hands that raised your child now quivered, not from time but from the weight of her betrayal? The platform grew quiet after the train left, the echo of its wheels fading into the night like a cruel reminder of the life I no longer belonged to. I sat hunched on the bench, watching strangers pass me by without a second glance. People hurried to embrace arriving relatives. Lovers ran into each other's arms. Children tugged at their parents' coats with laughter in their eyes. I was surrounded by life, yet I might as well have been invisible. It struck me that no one even noticed an older woman sitting alone with no luggage, no family, no destination. I could have vanished right there and the world would have continued turning. For decades, I had given myself away piece by piece until there was nothing left. And now I was learning how quickly society erases the invisible, the expendable. Then, as if to drive the knife deeper, I saw her. An elderly woman about my age, standing just a few feet away, her back stooped, but her smile radiant. Her family surrounded her, 2 sons lifting her bags, a daughter wrapping a scarf around her neck, grandchildren clutching her arms with boundless affection. They spoke to her, tenderly fussing over her like she was the most precious thing in the world. And when the train finally came, they all pressed in for one more hug. One more kiss, as if they could not bear to let her go. I could not tear my eyes away. My heart clenched as though I had been forced to watch the version of my life that might have been. My own daughter had just turned her face away, while this stranger was celebrated, honored, cherished. The contrast was too stark, too cruel. I lowered my gaze, but the image seared itself into me. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to drift backward in time, desperate for something gentler to cling to. I remembered Claire as a little girl, her small body curled against mine after a thunderstorm frightened her awake. She had pressed her face into my chest, whispering, "Don't let go, Mom." I had stroked her hair, promising I never would. Those nights had been exhausting, but I never resented them. They were proof that she needed me, proof that my sacrifices meant something. I remembered the afternoons after school when she would sit at the kitchen table. Textbooks spread everywhere while I stirred soup on the stove. She would ask me questions about math, about boys, about life, and I would answer as best I could, though I often felt inadequate. But when she smiled and said, "You always know what to say," it was enough to carry me through another day. I remembered her graduation, the way she looked in her cap and gown, scanning the crowd until her eyes found mine. She had waved, beaming, and in that moment I believed every hardship had been worth it. The nights of hunger, the years of exhaustion, the dreams I had folded away. All of it had led to that smile. These memories were soft, like a balm pressed against my raw wound. For a moment, I let myself breathe in them, let them cradle me the way I once cradled her. But memory is cruel when it collides with the present, because the Claire of today was not the Claire of those memories. Today she had stood by while her husband stripped me of dignity, of security, of even a seat on the train beside her. The ache returned, sharper than before. My chest tightened until it felt hard to breathe. The station around me blurred, faces and voices dissolving into a dull hum. I was alone, not just in this place, but in life itself. Forgotten. Erased. I thought about all the ways I had defined myself through her. Every choice, every sacrifice had been justified by the idea that motherhood was eternal, that blood bound us in ways nothing could sever. Yet here I was, abandoned in the most literal sense, discarded like the crust of a meal already consumed. And worse, it was done without anger, without explanation, just silence. Silence that spoke volumes. As the evening deepened, the crowd thinned, and the platform became eerily quiet. I sat there with my bag nearly empty, my wallet gone, my family gone, my future uncertain. My hands rested in my lap, palms open, as if I were waiting for someone to place something in them. But no one came. Nothing came. The truth seeped in with the cold night air. Love is not unbreakable. Sacrifice does not guarantee loyalty. And family can vanish when you need them most. How many times had I told myself that love was enough, that devotion would be repaid, that blood was a bond stronger than betrayal? How many times had I believed with unshakable certainty that family was forever, until tonight shattered it in silence. The station had grown colder, emptier, until I felt as though the world had folded me into its shadows. My breath misted in the air as I clutched my thin coat tighter, my body trembling not from age but from the weight of betrayal. Hours passed. Though I lost track of time, the ache in my chest dulled into numbness, and with it came a quiet clarity. I reached into the bottom of my bag and found the one thing Thomas had not managed to take, a small leather notebook, its edges worn smooth from years of being hidden away. I opened it with hands that still shook, flipping through pages filled with tidy handwriting, dates and numbers that only I had ever known. Investments made long ago, bonds rolled over year after year, dividends quietly collected, property taxes paid for a small rental house 2 towns over, and on the last page, written in careful script, a name and a number. Daniel Whitmore, my banker, the only person who knew the truth of my secret life. I stared at the number as the seconds slipped by. My phone's screen glowed weakly, the battery icon red and threatening to die. I had perhaps one call left before it abandoned me, just as everyone else had. My thumb hovered over the digits before I pressed dial, listening to the hollow ring on the other end. Mrs. Ellison? His voice was calm, steady, as though he had been expecting me all along. It's me, I whispered, my throat dry. I don't have long. My phone... I understand, he said gently. What can I do for you? I hesitated, staring out at the empty tracks. I need to know about Claire and her husband. Have they touched anything that belongs to me? There was a pause, the faint click of keys being pressed. Then Daniel's voice returned, lower, edged with concern. Mrs. Ellison, you should know this. Thomas has been attempting to secure a line of credit using the house, listed under Claire's name. He's been pressing aggressively, but so far the bank has not finalized approval. My stomach tightened. Of course. This had never been about me as a person. To Thomas, I had only ever been a gatekeeper to resources he believed he deserved. My erasure, his cruelty, Claire's silence. It all connected back to money. To the secret I had thought no one knew. Somehow Thomas had sniffed it out, or at least sensed it. Is Claire aware? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Her signature is on the preliminary documents, Daniel said carefully. I can't speak to her understanding of the situation, but legally, she is complicit. The world tilted for a moment, the platform swaying beneath me. Claire. My Claire. She wasn't just silent. She was part of it. All those years I had believed she didn't know, that she was simply blind with loyalty to her husband. But the truth was worse. She had chosen him over me, not just with words, but with ink on paper. I pressed the phone harder to my ear as though I could hold myself together by clinging to Daniel's voice. And if I wanted to stop this? Daniel cleared his throat. Mrs. Ellison, with your assets and the trust documents already in place, you have full authority to intervene. I must ask you directly. Do you want me to move forward on your behalf? The question lingered like smoke in the air. Do you want to intervene? It was more than a financial inquiry. It was an invitation, a test, a mirror held up to the woman I had allowed myself to become. I had spent decades shrinking, folding, silencing myself for the sake of love, for the sake of family. And look where it had led me, to abandonment, to betrayal, to erasure. For the first time in years, I realized that the power I held wasn't in Claire's hands, or Thomas's, or in their approval. It had always been mine. I was not weak. I was not helpless. The notebook in my lap, the voice in my ear, the fortune hidden in plain sight, all of it proved that I was more than the fragile role they had written for me. Yes, I said, my voice steady now. Do it. Whatever needs to be done. Stop him. Daniel's tone shifted, brisk and professional. Consider it handled. I'll update the paperwork immediately. The line went silent after that, my phone finally giving out, the screen fading to black. But instead of despair, I felt something else bloom inside me, something strong, something unshakable. It wasn't revenge that burned in me, it was reclamation. For once, I wasn't acting to preserve Claire's comfort or Thomas's ambition. I was acting for myself. I closed the notebook and held it to my chest, the station quiet around me. The world had not changed in that moment, but I had. And now, I wonder, would you dare to stand, not to shout, not to demand, but to silently rewrite the rules of the game? When the phone finally went dead in my hand, I stood from the cold bench and felt an unfamiliar steadiness in my legs. The night air pressed against me, damp and sharp, but instead of weighing me down, it seemed to push me forward. I walked out of the station without looking back, leaving behind the echo of trains, the memory of betrayal, and the version of myself who had sat there waiting for someone else to save her. Within days, I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was nothing grand, 2 rooms, a narrow balcony with chipped paint, a kitchen that smelled faintly of dust, but it was mine. For the first time in years, every object inside belonged solely to me, untouched by the needs or judgments of others. I unpacked carefully, placing my worn notebooks and a few paintbrushes on the table. Then I stood in the empty room and whispered aloud, "This is where I begin again." The days that followed carried a rhythm of their own. In the mornings, I walked to the local market, learning the names of the vendors and delighting in their small kindnesses. In the afternoons, I bought canvases and paints with money I had long forbidden myself to spend. But it wasn't only for me. A flyer went up on the community bulletin board, free art class for women over 50, no experience needed. The first evening, 3 women came. They carried nothing but timid smiles and stories, heavy in their eyes. One had been abandoned by her children in another state. Another lived in a senior home where no one visited her. The third had lost her savings to a son's failed business. They sat stiffly at the table until I handed them brushes. Then slowly, the colors began to bloom. Week after week, more women joined. Our little class became a sanctuary of quiet laughter and trembling hands, discovering strength again. I guided them gently, not just in art, but in remembering that they mattered. Their strokes were messy, uncertain, but each one carried defiance against invisibility. Meanwhile, behind closed doors and sealed documents, I moved in silence. With Daniel's help, I purchased the very mortgage Thomas had tried to manipulate. Through a trust in my name, hidden behind layers of legality, I became the invisible hand holding the strings of his financial future. He didn't know. Claire didn't know. No one knew. And that secrecy was my shield. I did not do it to punish them. I did it so they would never again have the power to strip me bare. There was satisfaction in the irony. Thomas walked through his days unaware that the very woman he had abandoned at a train station now controlled the roof over his head. But I did not gloat. I did not confront him. I simply lived, knowing that strength didn't require an audience. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the smell of paint filled the air, I sat with my students around the table. A woman named Evelyn, her hands trembling from age and grief, dipped her brush into blue paint and froze. Her eyes welled with tears. "Tell me, Margaret," she whispered, her voice fragile. "Do you think it's too late for me? Too late to start again?" The room fell quiet. The other women looked at me, waiting, their own unspoken fears hanging heavy between us. I set down my brush, reached across the table, and steadied her shaking hand. "It's never too late," I said softly. "As long as we breathe, there's a chance to begin again." Evelyn blinked rapidly, then bent forward and drew a trembling line of blue across her canvas. The others followed, their laughter tentative but real. My heart swelled. In that moment, I realized that my rebirth wasn't about money or revenge. It was about choosing to live, to share, to help others believe in themselves the way I had learned to believe in me. My power was no longer a secret fortune or hidden trust. It was this: the ability to stand after being knocked down and to lift others as I did. And yet, in the quiet of my nights, I could not ignore the truth. I now held a power over Thomas and Claire that they would never suspect. Their lives balanced unknowingly in my hands. So I ask you, if you held the power to decide the fate of those who denied you, would you use it to strike back, or would you use it only to protect yourself? News travels in strange ways. I did not look for it, but whispers found me. Thomas's business had begun to unravel. Creditors circling, late payments piling higher than he could manage. He swaggered less these days, I heard, his charm worn thin beneath the weight of desperation. And Claire, my Claire, was caught in the tide beside him, her voice trembling when she signed documents she no longer understood. It was only a matter of time before the discovery. Buried within the stack of paperwork, the trust appeared, its lettering stark, its authority absolute. My name, Margaret Ellison. No disguise, no alias, just the truth they had never cared to know. The house, their supposed foundation, no longer theirs to bend to Thomas's will. The bank had turned cold. The trust had spoken. And I was the hand they had forgotten, still had strength. I imagined the moment their eyes widened, the silence between them growing heavier than any argument. Perhaps Claire asked him, "Did you know?" Perhaps he muttered curses under his breath, realizing the quiet old woman he had abandoned had placed boundaries he could not cross. Whatever words were spoken, I would never hear them. I didn't need to, because I was not waiting for apology or vindication or even acknowledgement. My victory was not in their suffering. It was in my survival. It was in the paint-stained hands of the women who now filled my evenings. Women who looked to me not as a burden, but as a beacon. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the wide windows of our borrowed classroom, I guided Evelyn's brush across a canvas. Around us, laughter spilled into the air like music, the sound of women reclaiming pieces of themselves. And then, in the doorway, a shadow lingered. I felt them before I saw them. Claire and Thomas stood a distance away, not daring to step inside. Claire's face was pale, her eyes rimmed with something like regret, or perhaps just shock. Thomas, for once, did not smirk. His gaze shifted nervously, caught between defiance and recognition. But I did not rise. I did not speak. I kept my hand over Evelyn's, steadying her trembling stroke, as though nothing outside our circle mattered. The room belonged to us, to the women who had been silenced, cast aside, overlooked. I belonged here, not in their fragile, unraveling world. Still, in the brief glance we shared, something passed between my daughter and me. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but acknowledgement. She saw me, not as a worn-out shadow, but as a woman, whole, alive, stronger than she had imagined. And that, at last, was enough. They slipped away quietly, leaving no words, no promises, just the knowledge that I was no longer theirs to erase. When class ended, I stood on the steps outside, the evening air cool against my skin. My students filed past me, their chatter warm and full of plans for the next week. I breathed deeply, feeling the peace settle into my bones. I thought of the train station again, the bench, the emptiness, the way I had felt like a ghost among the living. Tonight was its opposite. I was not invisible. I was not erased. I had carved a place in the world where I could stand, not as a mother defined by her sacrifices, but as Margaret Ellison, defined by her strength. There was no applause, no grand vindication, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my story did not end in loss. My sacrifices had been denied, yes, but my worth had been reclaimed. And sometimes that is the truest form of victory. I turned, locking the door behind me, and began the walk back to my apartment. My steps were steady, each one carrying me further from the woman they had tried to discard. The night hummed softly around me, alive with possibilities I had once believed too late to chase. And I wonder now, perhaps you too are walking in silence through your own betrayals, carrying wounds no one else sees. Perhaps you too have been erased, forgotten, denied. If so, ask yourself this: will you choose to slip away quietly, or will you choose, like me, to rise in silence, to begin again?